Hi, and welcome to Module 3 of our Competent Vision and Outcome Management course. In this one, we're going to look at outcome design. Outcome is the word that sits above things like blueprints. So what we're going to start looking at here is some of the concepts around blueprints. Outcome design is all about establishing how things work now and how they'll work in the future. So the terms we use are as is, for as it is at the moment, and future state for what we're going to turn it into. All right. And we look at that through the eyes of process, organization, tools and technology and information. And so the core of program management is understanding this. Now, this takes us outside the comfort world of program and project managers and very heavily into the world of business analysis. And really, the whole blueprint thing sits with the business change managers because they're the ones who have to go and work out how this stuff works. The program manager is going to be responsible for delivering the capability for them to change. So our starting point is, how does it work now? And I can tell from bitter experience that when we've delivered programs, if we don't understand the starting point, then you're heading for disaster. All right. So we need to think about what the customers experience, what are the front office operations, what are the back office operations, how does that fit into the infrastructure, how does the technology support work, the building usage, etc., and of course our relationship with suppliers. And what we need to do is design a model of the same but in the future that's different. So in this scenario that we're looking at putting in new customer facing processes perhaps. Now that could be a new call center, it could be a portal, it could be online services. We want to create a new interface with them. And to do that, we've got to recognize we need new processes. We don't just switch from being face-to-face to virtual without other things. And if we do this, it's going to affect our space. Yeah, we're going to need different building infrastructures. We're recording this roughly in the middle of the pandemic. We are seeing total differences in the way that we want to use our infrastructure, our telecoms, video conferencing. We don't need so many buildings, all that kind of stuff. So as we're thinking about the future state, we're going to be changing processes, the space that we need, the layouts, possibly the people. If we're moving to more virtual working, we maybe need more or less people, I don't know. So the whole world is changing. Now the program needs to know what that future is going to be like to some extent, because okay, we've got to accept that it's not going to have a full certainty, but it's going to have a rough idea, because without that it can't commission the projects to build the capability. All right, so it's a really important thing, and as I've said in the previous videos, it's a gap and it's outside the comfort zone of program and project managers, and unless you've got great BCMs, this is where the program will go wrong. And of course, if you don't have this, you're not going to have your benefits sorted. All right. So the difference between the as is and the to be, in the to be state, we're expecting to get benefits or we wouldn't go there. Well, if you don't know the start and the end, how can you calculate your benefits? So what we're looking at is, how do we fill this gap? What is it the program needs to build to make the future happen? And we express that in terms of process, organization, tools and information. So the process is how do we do stuff? Organization is who does it now and in the future. Technology is pretty much everything. Yeah, it's whether your buildings, your IT, whatever it is, and manufacturing equipment, whatever it happens to be. And the management information is the one that people forget. That's the information that we use to manage the business. All right. And a lot of programs are commissioned because you don't have that information. Now, one of the problems I've spotted with our clients and in my days as a program manager was, how do we find out what the as is state? The business is running quite happily at the moment, things are working, but it's rarely written down. And one of my own personal experiences is how the business operates and how the business thinks it operates is quite different. So the work on the as is state is really valuable. So, but where do you go and find it? So we've got some ideas coming up on where you can go and find information about how does it work now. Your QMS is a good starting point. Your quality system, your ISO 9001 writes down how things should work. Whether they work that way is something different. but it's that sort of area. Yeah, your 14,001 is going to do your environmental stuff. Your 18,001 is doing your health and safety. So that's a pretty good start on where to go looking. How do things work now? What you need to do then is verify they do. Some other places, service level agreements. If you're a internal supplier like the IT department or somebody or other, you've probably got service level data agreements with your customers. Whether back in my days when I restructured a big IT department once, we had service level agreements. I knew how it should work, but then each different area of that business that delivered IT was doing it subtly different. And that's why nobody could really get their heads around it about how was it actually, what was the as is state. But it was there, and honestly, they've not varied as much as they'd like to give the impression at that time. But it was a massive lesson for me about actually knowing, having to do the as is state. Because if you've got this data, you can put together a much more robust argument for delivering change. Contracts and agreements with suppliers, really important one. We did some work with a bank once, and when we were doing this as is state, we discovered that the bank had two suppliers who were contracted to deliver the same services. This was to do with property management. It was a huge estate across the country, thousands of branch offices. But they had two suppliers doing the same thing, and they were paying them both to do the same thing. So just doing the as-is state can sometimes deliver you benefits that you had no idea were there. Staff surveys are a big one. When we're doing our maturity assessments, the P3M3 assessments, we quite often get their quality system. They tell us how their risk is being managed, etc., etc., etc. But we always do a staff survey, and we do a desk review to check the way it's written down and supposed to work. Is it actually working? And that provides us with so much rich information. Normally they find it isn't working, but there's good reasons why it isn't working. And that's the knowledge that you need to have, for when you're designing the future state, because staff quite often know the best way to get stuff done, and they know where the problems are that aren't documented. Systems analysis, where a great way of looking at it is how does data move around the system? How does information get from one end, from the customer, as it's coming in from the customer, to the output at the other end, to their solution? That journey is amazingly complex. And so sometimes the IT people know how that business works better than the business themselves. I'd say the same for property people as well. They kind of understand things. They see a view of the world that's different. HR records. How many staff work here? Honestly, that's such a simple question for many, but for many organisations, they don't. It's a kind of a complete, the complex question, because you've got contractors in, you've got suppliers in the building. I remember one organisation that I worked for had 26,000 people. That organisation was continually restructuring and outsourcing, but 26,000 people kept coming through the door each day. They just had different labels on them. So you actually have the same number of people running that organisation. They just work for different organisations as they outsourced. But knowing that it still took 26,000 people to run the organisation was an important piece of information that if you just looked at staff numbers, you wouldn't have picked up. Supplier performance. Knowing what they're up to at the moment. Are they underperforming, overperforming? Maybe they're filling in gaps that you don't know about because they're just very helpful people, or maybe they're just watching gaps knowing they're there. That's an important area, particularly anybody that's involved in safety will be really familiar with the need to understand how suppliers are dealing with that area. Market analysis, knowing what's going on outside your organisation, around it, what the trends are in travel or whatever it happens to be, because assuming that that you know what's going on is the most dangerous thing you can do. There might be changes in behaviours that you don't know about, and you could be sending your program off in completely the wrong direction if you don't really know how things are happening now. Are you seeing a boom by accident? After a year of COVID, some organisations have performed outstandingly because they just happen to be in the right place at the right time. Well, so you've got plenty of organisations that, through no fault of their own, are in a real terrible state. So understanding what's cause and effect around this stuff is key. Okay, and then of course your internal performance. How does your internal performance compare with like organisations? How effective you are, and as we're probably in a project and program world, your P3M3 maturity model, which you're going to get a chance to do during the assessment anyway. How do you compare with others? In risk or either outcome development? How good are you? How many have you done before? How consistent? Can you be better? You think you can be better, but is it you could be outperforming everybody else? So maybe the basis and assumption of the need for change is wrong. And honestly, I've seen that as well. So that's the as is state. That's really, really important. We all talk about the future and outcomes, but it's really about where are we starting from. I just want to spend a little bit of time explaining the Potty model. Now, it's 4 headings: process, organization, tools, technology, and information. But a common mistake is to see those as 4 headings that you make lists of. And the key thing is understanding how it all fits together and connects. So in this model that I'm using in front of you, you can see a process for handling pretty much anything. And any sort of service company would do this. You'd get the inquiry in, you'd record it, you'd analyze the client's needs, you'd allocate it to somebody, you'd organize a visit or you dispatch it, you solve the problem somehow and then close it. So, if you were calling out the guy who fixes the boiler in your house or the boiler in your building, you'd ring them up. You'd hope that the client you're using would keep a record of it. They'd probably do some phone analysis. Yeah, send somebody out. They come, fix the boiler, close the job. All right, there we go. So that's the process. Now, what we want to do is then think, okay, well, how does the organisation part fit with the process? Well, if you actually look at that, you can say, well, we might have a call logger that takes your call about your boiler. They record it, and then they'll pass it on to some sort of fault analyst who will look at the problem for you, maybe do some remote diagnostics. And if they can't fix it by telling you to flick this switch on and off or something or other, they organise an engineer to visit. The engineer solves the problem and closes it. Now, you don't want engineers all the way along that process because it'd be too expensive and they probably wouldn't enjoy their job very much. So there's your O's started. So there's the O that's directly connected to the process. And when you're looking at it, you could see those different elements being in different organisations. You can have a call centre doing one bit. I'm guessing we're talking about boilers, could be British Gas. They might have call loggers, fault analysis, but the engineers could be the local plumber that they send round. So that's your first line of support. And then looking behind that in the O as well, you've got support functions, payroll, management. We've got training and competence. So you need to know about the numbers, the types, where are they located? How do we go and get new ones if we need them? Recruitment. All right. So when we talk about the O, it's that whole organizational picture that supports the process, because the process is at the core. Without the process, none of this would be needed. And then we look at the next bit, which is the technology to support this. So you need a range of technology. You need a call routing system. You need a fault logging system. You need a knowledge base. So have we seen this problem before that they can inquire? Then we maybe go back to the logging system, or we've got a different logging system. We'll transfer the call to a subcontractor somewhere. They're going to need a car to get there, or a van or something. And then they fix it. They're going to need a bunch of tools to do that. But they still need the fault logging system, which is at the core of the technology support, the process. You've got other technology that's supporting the fix. Okay, and then of course behind that you've got more tools and technology. You've got desks, phones, workstations, all that. And also we've got support contracts, and they need to be accommodated as well. So then you can see the 3 of them now. You've got the process, the organization, the technology and tools. Then we've got the management information that we need to run it. Yeah, how many customers have we got? How many faults per customer? How many vehicles? What about the contracts? What's our service level agreement with Bill, the plumber? What stock of spares do we need? How do we keep control of the amount of the cost of those spares? How are we going to do the accounts, handle all the invoicing, and how do we invoice customers and all that sort of stuff? And basically analysing the logs to make sure things are being fixed in your system. All right, so that's the whole Potty model in one place. And you've got to understand each bit of it, because you could be just fixing 1 or 2 of those places. Now, when we move on to the next model, we'll look at lean system. Now, it might be that your program looks at those 7 steps and goes, you know what? We're going to take one of those steps out. We're not even going to have the allocation going on anymore. We're going to do it a different way. So you could be taking a step out of that process. But if you do that, what does it mean? What damage could you cause? But we'll come on to that later. Just introducing a really popular one that I've become familiar with over the last few years, which is a thing called GAF, which really comes out of the technology sector, where obviously this world is horribly complex nowadays. And so with the TOGAF model, it looks at the organisation in the same way that an architect would look at a building. So it looks at the different layers. Now, this was one that was that we came across from the e-government strategy a few years ago. And so, you've got the technical infrastructure in this one, which is basically how the IT works. Then you've got applications, then you've got data within the applications, management information that sits on top of that, and then the business drivers that drive that. So you can see that for the ICT guys, they've got this model, but this model that comes out of that world can work just as well in anything else, because the technical infrastructure could be buildings, railway lines, roads, it can be manufacturing equipment, it could be the buildings, whatever you want it to be, but it actually shows how the layers work. So it's another way of using that POTI model to help understand how things work. I hope that's kind of makes sense to you. Okay, well, that's the end of my lecture on outcome design. We didn't really use the word outcome much because we mainly talked about blueprint, which is, of course, the infrastructure that sits behind the outcomes. And that's where the program management effort needs to go. It's where we need the business analyst, the BCM, and everybody working together so we understand what the change state's like. Okay, well, as always, time for a nice cup of coffee now, and I hope that you go on to enjoy the module.